All right, guys. Thanks for joining in for another episode of Rukshan On X. I've been doing this for a couple of days now, and it's become more frequent. And I've actually advanced again today, and I've got a guest in to join me for Rukshan On X with none other than Topher Field, who will be going through his X with me and chatting about some of the news and happenings of in Australia and also around the world. So, Topher, thanks for joining in on the show and being the first guest on this platform for me.
Look, you've characterized it as an advance. I think you might be overselling it. You might be over egging the sauce there. Look, I'll do my best. I'll do my best. And you know what? I feel like I'm a real tech wizard right now. I've got a microphone, I've got a headset on, I've got the camera, a laptop, I've got another laptop over here with comments, and I've got my phone for looking at my X. So I'm all teched out.
You're all teched out. Where's your cigar? That's what I'm wondering, because that's your classic look.
Rukshan, I don't have enough hands. I don't have
Fair
enough
enough.
hands for two computers, a phone, a headset, a microphone, and a cigar. Come on.
Yeah. Like always, guys, with this kind of show that I'm doing, you'll see we have the comments streaming as well on the side. So you're all involved in this. Try to be nice with the comments. Don't say mean things about Topher. Don't say mean things about me, but you know me. I don't mind the trolling too much. You can say things about Avi if you want. He's probably watching.
I will. I will say things about Avi.
You will say things about Avi as well.
You can bet your bottom dollar I will say things about Avi.
Someone's asked Topher if you're in your garage. Where are you? They're asking you where you are.
I'm in my studio under the house. So
In the studio.
Technically in the garage, but we've actually built a sound room inside the garage.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
That's good. And on the topic of sound, I just want to check with everyone. Can you guys actually hear us clearly today? So I'll just give you a couple of seconds for some people to tell us that the sound is coming through good. Topher's mic volume is a bit lower than yours. I'll just lower my mic volume then.
All right.
Oh, you got some fans in here as well, Topher. Some people that have watched some of your videos as well. So we'll get to that as well. But first off, let's just jump into your X and see what Topher Field has been discussing online. And I'll get some of the thoughts on, some of the things which are happening that you think are important right now in our country and around the world. So let me just jump in here. So this is Topher Field's X, guys. So if you're not following him already, you can find him at Topher Field on X. And I want to push as many people as I can towards using platforms like X, because Topher, as you would know, with Elon Musk and everything that's happening, it is more censorship free. We are more freely able to talk about topics that we could never talk about on Facebook, right? So how are you finding X these days?
Look, it's quite funny. You and I are both well aware of how much censorship there is. We both had to be ever so careful during all the COVID era. I've managed to never lose a page. I've never had a page taken off any social media platform, but that's because I've been self-censoring and because I've been so aware of how to say things and what to say and what not to say. And so it's actually taken me a little bit of time to adjust, because I find myself sitting there typing and going, "Oh, can I say?" Well, yes, of course I can. It's X. Of course I can say that. And there's a recalibration happening, and I guess it's the reverse boiling frog. I didn't realize. I mean, I knew it was bad, but I don't think I'd realized how much I was self-censoring until I had a platform where I could actually just speak, and not have to worry about that.
Yeah, that's so true. It's been so transformative. Just having people just having discussions like a bit more openly, especially around things like, COVID and with everything that's kind of coming out, and just seeing these topics being discussed very openly and knowing that, not that people might, the information might not be right or true, whatever, that doesn't matter. It's being debated. And there's two sides who are like arguing about this thing. And I think that's the way it should kind of be, without these intermediaries getting in the middle of it and saying, no, this is the source of truth. We are the fact checkers. You have to listen to exactly everything that we say. And as you know very well, they've been wrong on many counts. So X has really changed the game, like you said.
Can I throw another spanner into those works there? We've got an AI freight train coming at us, and I don't think people have fully begun to comprehend the implications. We are less than 3 years away from never being able to trust another video that we see. We are literally a few years away from people being able to tune into something like this and not actually being able to be certain that that really is Rukshan or that that really is Topher. And it'll be able to be done in real time. You could be on a Zoom call with somebody and it's actually an AI chatbot that's writing the responses and voicing the responses and animating the face all in real time in a completely photorealistic way. We are just a few years away from that. And what's going to happen, I think, we're going to see the world kind of split in two. There is going to be the part of the world that dives headlong into this fakery. The
Mm.
perfection that will be offered by AI will be just completely irresistible to some people, and they will dive headlong into that, and they'll lose themselves in the process. But there will be a counter revolution. There will be a counterculture, and I'm not going to guess as to whether they'll be the majority or the minority, whatever. I don't care. They will exist. There will be a counter to that culture that says, I just want what's real, even if it's ugly, Allah, right? Even if I think they're wrong, even if I think they're arrogant or I think they smell, I don't actually care anymore. I just want the thing that's real.
Yeah.
And what you and I have to get really, really, I guess, really preach and scream from the rooftops is a debate is better than a perfect monologue.
Yeah.
An imperfect argument where someone must be wrong. Maybe both sides are wrong in some cases, but at least someone's wrong. There's an imperfect argument going on is better than I guess fake perfection, which is what AI and what government are trying to offer through the fact checkers and everything else.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, AI, there is a kind of a comfort in AI right now for many people who go to it as the auto, like, when you need to type up a resume or something, you're like, okay, I'm going to go to AI. You need to
Yeah,
type up a letter, you're going to go to AI.
yeah,
And it's becoming way too comfortable. And it's this like whole thing with convenience. Like humans are like creatures that love convenience. So as soon as they make something very simple and easy to do, we go
mm,
down that path. And
mm,
it's, the path of least resistance, whatever, for humans. So it is very possible that things like AI will be used by governments and these kind of, the same
oh,
authorities that we've had trouble with to actually, put people into this sense of safety about everything else around them. Like, oh, the AI said like it's safe.
yeah, yeah,
It'll
yeah,
be
yeah.
it'll be that kind of thing. I think that's what you're trying to allude
All
to.
right. So Rukshan, if you really want to go deep on this, normally I reserve this for like the second hour of a podcast when I'm in the second half of a bottle of whiskey. But let me go really, 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 really scary on this. There is a scenario, and this is not a prediction. This is an observation of what's possible. There is a scenario in which exactly what you just described happens, and governments use AI as the external authority instead of like COVID. They said, "Oh well, the experts are telling us X, Y, and Z." They'll say, "Well, the AI is telling us X, Y, and Z." And there is a lens that you can look at that through in which you could see AI as the Antichrist. You could see AI as that omniscient, all powerful, miraculous being to which all the nations of the earth bow down. And if you don't get the mark, whatever that form that takes, then you can't do business. Well, shutting someone out of online transactions is pretty much shutting them out of doing business these days. You could see a scenario, if you read through the book of Revelation, you can see a scenario in which AI itself, I'm not afraid of. AI is just a technology, it's just agnostic. But the weaponization of AI and the turning of AI into an idol
Mm,
that actually becomes in a way a form of antichrist. And look,
mm.
I'm sorry, I've gone way too deep for the first
You
15 minutes of a podcast.
you have gone pretty deep. I'm actually questioning now my own interactions with AI. Maybe that's for another episode. Maybe we can
Yeah,
delve deep into that. But let's just jump onto your X, Topher. So some of
yeah,
the things that you've been talking about, I actually wanted to get to this because I saw this today as well on
yeah.
one of the morning shows. So there was a bit of coverage there for the Libertarian Party, which is kind of cool. But I'm just going to play
Mhm.
your video here, and we'll just discuss what's happening here.
This is not a drill. You remember a few weeks ago, I put up a video talking about how petrol would be below $1 a litre if it weren't for the fuel excise and for the GST. Well, now it's happening in real life. This is not clickbait. This is not a drill. This is real. If you can get to the APCO petrol station in Cranbourne West in Melbourne between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. today, the 18th of December, then you will get a tank full of petrol for just 99 cents per litre because the Libertarian Party are going to cover the excise and the GST for you. And as you sit there waiting your turn, because no doubt there's going to be a lot of people trying to get that 99-cent petrol, or perhaps as you sit there frustrated thinking, man, that would have been nice, but I can't get there in that amount of time, have a think about the fact that 99-cent petrol is actually just your future on libertarianism. Less taxes, less regulation, more freedom, higher standard of living, and a better place to live. worth.
So that took place today, and I think this is the picture from that. So how did that go? How was the public reception of that? Do you know anything about how that worked out, and what's the concept behind this?
Okay. Well, what's hilarious, people are going to say I'm lying, but I did not know that the Libertarian Party were doing this until this morning. When I released my video a few weeks ago, which was actually at a different APCO. So APCO are a really great petrol station brand. They tend to have the cheapest petrol. If you've got a local APCO, I really do recommend you check them out at the very least. And I saw, so I'd been thinking for a while, I want to do a video where I can talk about the fact that price that's up on the billboard right now would be below $1 if it weren't for taxes. But of course, once it gets above about $1.65, then that's no longer true. Once it's at about $1.69, you do the math and you're still above $1 even once you remove the 50 cents of excise and the GST. And so I found an APCO that was like $1.63 or something like that. And I did the math in my head. I was literally filling up with diesel. I went there to get fuel, and I saw it and I went, hang on, the math works. and people pick me up for saying math. They want me to say maths. I'm going to say math. They criticized my marbles video for using the word math of all things. Trolls, I tell you can't keep everyone happy. So I did the video and I put it up there. And Jordan Ditloff, who's the Senate candidate for Victoria for the Libertarian Party, he and I talk fairly often. I emceed one of his campaign events recently. And he told me today, because we were talking once I found out about their stunt, he said, I saw your video go up and this is Jordan Ditloff on the screen now. I saw your video go up and I really wanted to tell you what we had planned, but I couldn't tell you. It was embargoed. I wasn't allowed to yet. So I didn't know about this until this morning, but I saw the Libertarian Party announce it. I thought, brilliant. This is exactly the kind of thing the Libertarians need to be doing. This is this is aggressive. This is getting people where they're at, which is cost of living right now. And it's an attention-grabbing stunt. And look at the mainstream media coverage that they've gotten out of that. So I think this is, from a strategic point of view, I think this is brilliant. From a messaging point of view, I think this is spot on. This is exactly the stuff the Libertarians should be talking about. And I'm just really, really encouraged to see the Libertarian Party. And full disclosure, I'm a former member. I'm a former candidate for them. And whilst I'm no longer a member or a candidate, I fully support their policies. I am a Libertarian. So full disclosure, there is a relationship there. But I'm just super excited to see that they're getting aggressive, they're getting punchy, and they're beginning to get cut through.
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely for a smaller, minor party like that to get this kind of coverage leading up to an election, I guess, next year. And then we're having all these cost of living crisis debates that we always have in the community. And of course, cost of fuel is a major thing in that. But I thought, for a long time, a lot of people have actually given up on ever thinking that the price of fuel would be what it used to be for one, for many different reasons, of course. And then also, of course, people have just kind of resigned to the fact that it might even just keep going up. So this, I know it seems, I've seen some comments, people saying it's like a political gimmick to get attention, and yes, it might be.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah, but is there a possibility of this ever, even let's say not the Libertarians, but even one of the other political parties actually going through with something like this? Is it ever possible?
Look,
or
before the advent of Doge in the US, I would have said definitely not, but everything has changed. All bets are off now since the November election, Trump winning, and then him actually following through with Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency. If you're on X, you know what I'm talking about. You can't be on X and have missed all of that stuff being talked about. What's really interesting, so let me put my libertarian sort of wonk policy guy hat on for a second. What we're not going to have is this instant transition to a perfectly privatized world. Roads are going to be maintained by governments for the foreseeable future, probably for the rest of my lifetime. And for as long as that's true, you have to fund that somehow. So the question is, how do we fund road maintenance? And a lot of people are actually objecting to the idea of cutting the road excise because they're saying, oh, well, our roads are already terrible. We don't want them to get even worse. What are you going to do if the funding's cut? Well, here's the truth. Fuel excise is no longer earmarked for road maintenance. It goes into general revenue, and the amount of money spent on our roads is only a fraction of what is actually collected out of the fuel excise. But also, even from a user pays point of view, and I'm sorry, I'm getting wonkish in policy here, but ideally, if the government is going to fund something, you want it to fund it as similarly to how the private sector would have done it as possible. That's going to be the thing that leads to the most efficiency, to the least negative externalities. Sorry, getting down a rabbit hole here. But
that's okay.
The point being, you ideally want the person that uses it to pay for it. That's your ideal scenario. And the further you deviate from that, the more the market gets distorted and inefficiency kicks in. So ideally, we want road users to pay for the roads. That's what we want. We don't want the grandmother who walks and rides a bicycle and doesn't have a car to be paying for the road maintenance necessarily. And so a tax on fuel is one way to do that. But even that's actually quite poor, because older cars tend to use more fuel, which means you're hitting poor people that drive older cars harder than you're hitting richer people who drive newer, more efficient cars.
Yeah.
Take for example, a tradie who has to drive a diesel 4-wheel drive with a bunch of tools long distances to work every day, versus a guy who drives his Tesla to and from the office that it's 5 minutes up the road because he can afford to live in Toorak. That's, the trade is getting hit with an enormous amount of fuel excise. So a better way, if we're going to move towards a user pay system, would be some kind of a distance-based charge, taking into account the mass of the vehicle that gets applied at the annual registration. Something like that. And I'm getting into the weeds here. But the fuel excise is obsolete. It doesn't achieve what it's supposed to achieve. And if we're just going to stuff the money into general revenue, then I think there is no defense for having it, or having it as high as what it is.
No, fair enough, man. That kind of makes sense to me. So in terms of the success of today, I believe 238 customers managed to get that deal, which is kind of cool. And the cost saved was about $5,800 overall. So, whether it's a gimmick or not, I think, there's been a bit of success in terms of getting the message out of the Libertarian Party to the wider Australian public. So, and it's going to be an interesting election anyway for some of these minor parties. So, is Jordan running in a state election or federal?
Just federal. So federal. He is the lead Senate candidate for Victoria in the federal election.
Okay.
Yeah.
No worries. We'll probably come back to the election towards the end, because I want to ask you about your marble collection, which you seem to have many of. Now, I do see complaints about audio, but some people are saying the audio is completely fine. So I do not know what this happens here. It's a bit of mystery to me. Anyway, let's keep moving on. I'm just going to squeeze through your X and find out what else you've been talking about. There are some things that potentially we can't talk about on Facebook still. So
yes,
perhaps we should be a bit careful.
Well, we can be a bit careful. I don't think any of these topics are taboo, just how we talk about it. So let me talk about this one, because this is one that Facebook were censoring, but they no longer have any right to.
Yes.
Because that's the up-to-date numbers. That is the numbers with California 99% counted. So let's recount some history here. Straight after the election, people began pointing out how many fewer votes Kamala Harris got compared to Donald Trump. However, the counterpoint was that the votes weren't all counted yet. California was only at 50% counted, and that meant that there were going to be millions more votes that had yet to be counted for Kamala Harris, and that was absolutely true. But this is now the final numbers. That argument no longer applies. So the final numbers are that Kamala Harris got just under 75 million votes in this election, and Joe Biden, the old doddering white guy, 4 years earlier got 81 million, 6 million, more than 6 million more.
Yeah.
So this is now a valid question. This is a question that we could not ask a few weeks ago, but this is now a valid question. Do we really believe that 6 million more Democrats who love a good diversity hire showed up 4 years ago to vote for a doddering old rich white guy, and then chose to stay at home instead of coming out to vote for the young woman of color?
Yeah.
Right? Is that really credible, or is this really concrete evidence that something else was going on? I certainly have an opinion on that, which I won't say out loud here, but these numbers cannot be censored anymore. These are the real numbers. Draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? So in terms of the mathematics and the numbers themselves, like you said, it can't be refuted. We can talk about it as much as we like. Of course, going deeper into this and going into the sensitivities of, I think Trump, really what I've seen Trump talk about over the last couple of weeks in relation to some of these things, he's not really backing down. I think they were trying to get him on one of the ABC interviews to be like, okay, you're going to let's just concede what happened in 2020, just move on from it. And he was like, no, not going to do that. So we might see some traction in this, in the sense of, I don't know if you saw today, Trump is suing a newspaper, the Des Moines Register in Iowa or wherever it was, for a poll saying that they were interfering in the election. So I think he's really serious about holding some of these type of institutions and people accountable as a step perhaps to avoid this kind of thing happening again in the future, because during COVID, yes, they had all the right conditions and all the right mystery and, all those things that came together to help them with what went down. But it's a bit harder now, like last election, obviously, with Trump, he came through. But in the future, you don't know what conditions might arise where they can again
Correct.
play these little mystery games with mail-in ballots and these type of things. So if he needs to use these 4 years to actually really clean up as much as he can the electoral system in the US, because it can be abused.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that said that Trump winning this time was proof that it wasn't rigged in 2020. And what they're not either not aware of or just choosing not to pay attention to is that there's been an enormous amount of electoral reform in various states in the US. So the federal election, the presidential election, is actually administrated at a state-by-state level over there. And many states, not all, instituted electoral reform to make it harder to cheat. Then in the other states where they hadn't instituted electoral reform, there was a massive grassroots movement so that all night long after the vote, there were people camped out, tailgating they call it, having barbecues and then actually camping in their vehicles in front of the polling places and in front of the counting places so that people couldn't show up in the middle of the night with ballots. And if they did, they were going to be on 10 different cameras with, all live streaming to the internet. So what we saw with Dinesh D'Souza's 2000 Mules documentary from 2020 could not happen again. And guess what? It didn't.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, the world can maybe look at the result of the last election and think we're in a much more fortunate position. These things really matter. The electoral system in the US and what happens in the US election really matters, because we are seeing a sense of calm in terms of how the power structures work in the world and how people interface with the West and the US. It's changing, and there's a lot more respect again for the US and their foreign policies, for instance, when it comes to wars and things. And you're seeing some of those things that we were really worried about that could maybe drag on. Perhaps it's going to settle down now when Trump comes into office. So, I've seen some of the comments where people say, US politics, what does it really matter to Australia? But I think it's so important, right? In so many ways, we're tied together that our future in Australia, we're such a little country, but we're a part of the same Western, alliance or hemisphere that these things impact us. So, that's why I talk about US politics. I think it's so important that we keep focusing on it because it does impact us.
Yeah, whether we like it or not, you can not like American politics, but you can't deny that it is important for us to keep an eye on.
Yeah, definitely. I want to coming back to Australian politics. This is a interesting one, I think, for you and me to discuss, because we were in the middle, thick and thin, of many different protests, and we have very strong views on the right to protest. And I know I talked about this yesterday at length, but Topher, I'd love to get your opinion. You shared a very lengthy statement about the right to protest and the conditions in which perhaps governments might be able to alter that, and what the responsibilities are of the citizenry as well when it comes to the right to protest. So obviously this touches around the changes that the Victorian government, Jacinta Allen, has proposed to increase powers for the police to identify people by telling them to take their masks off, and stopping them from bringing certain things like chains to chain themselves. And I think the other one was to stop people protesting around places of worship, and a few other things. So what's your general take on this particular view?
Well, I don't trust the government, full stop, which
I think we've lost Topher. As soon as he said he doesn't trust the government, he has gone offline. We've been talking too much. Let's see. I'll wait for Topher to come back in.
Are you there?
Yeah. Avi commented. You're back.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I
was going to say, Avi commented, and you said something about the government, and they took you offline. So perhaps the Mossad is involved. I'm not sure.
That's right. No, look, I don't trust the government at the best of times. I've got good reasons why I don't trust the government. And so I'm immediately very, very leery and very, very cynical the minute they want to touch anything. But at the same time, the fact is there are limits to what can be legitimately called protest. And so with your permission, I might actually just read part of this post that I made, because I put a lot of thought into how this was
go for it.
Going through the argument. So the right to protest must be carefully protected, but this also requires that we define what a protest is and what it isn't. Chanting slogans, waving signs, marching and listening to speeches are all obviously within the proper definition of protest and should be protected and defended without compromise. So, for example, a restriction on where you can do those things as long as it's a public place, I'd be very worried about. Saying you can't do that in front of a religious place of worship, I'd be very worried about, because I don't think you should have any restrictions on those legitimate forms of protest. At the other end, setting fire to buildings, smashing windows, and looting are not ever acceptable forms of protest and should always be punished as the crimes they are. In between those two extremes are a range of activities that we need to talk about. Is deliberately inconveniencing people more than is necessary a legitimate form of protest? I would say not. If you have 10,000 people in your protest, then you'll end up blocking roads. But given that the roads are public spaces, if 10,000 members of the public decide to use it as a protest location, then that is a legitimate use of public space. If, however, only 10 members of the public decide to block a road when they would have fit just fine on the footpath, then they've stepped outside the legitimate use of public space, because more members of the public are trying to drive than there are trying to protest. And they've also exited the space of protected protest and entered the space of public nuisance. Ditto gluing yourself to roads or hanging from overhead power lines and the like. This is not an act of raising awareness. This is an act of disruption for the purpose of causing inconvenience to other members of the public. So with regard to these reforms, I would say proceed with caution. Protest is a human right and must be protected without compromise. However, in order to protect legitimate protest, we must define it clearly and take appropriate actions against people who overstep the boundaries of protest and engage in criminal activity. So it's a little bit of a fence-sitting post, if I'm honest, but this is an area where we do need to actually think it through. Sorry to use the word, but we need to be nuanced with this. We must protect protest without compromise.
Yep.
But we also mustn't protect wanton criminal behavior.
Yep.
And things like gluing yourself to a road, smashing a window, burning down a building, these are not legitimate forms of protest in my view. And therefore the government can take action to stop those things from happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen like arguments that counter that, for instance, from, I guess, the left. They were sharing a post of a statue of, I can't remember her name, but a woman holding chains, and the impact that she had as a woman that time, tying herself to something while they were fighting for women's rights. So you can make the argument that sometimes the public, you're wearing a great t-shirt that says good people break bad laws. So there might be a time for people to, chain themselves to things to protest against something very bad. And like you said, it might be a case where there's hundreds of thousands of people on the street protesting because something very drastic has happened or something really bad is happening. But the nuisance protesters, I think, the 10 the warriors for the climate or whatever, what Extinction Rebellion, the 10 of them that will, chain themselves in the middle of the road to a car and glue themselves and just stop traffic and inconvenience the whole city. And really, they don't really push their issue forward. It's just all theatrics for whatever they're thinking. And they want to go get, taken away by the police. It's all a part of the theater. So I think there's a case there that laws need to address that, but it's a very fine balancing act because
we do have to be ever so careful. I mean, we saw, and I was personally a victim of this, the weaponization of things like incitement laws in Victoria. I was on the receiving end of 2 criminal incitement charges that they dropped 2.5 years later because they knew they were never going to win. It was just to waste my money and waste my time. But this was a law. Incitement charges were a law that was brought in because we needed to ensure that we could hold terrorists accountable and organized crime accountable and this really big problem. And then, of course, once they have the law on the books, they repurpose it and they use it for whatever they jolly well please. And this is the danger with anti-protest type laws. We have to deal with those real rat bags out there. And then once they've got the law on the books, they can start to scope creep and they can start to apply it in ways that they said they never would. So I'm really cautious, really, really cautious with this sort of stuff. I would rather have to tolerate protests that are out of order and are over the line of what I would consider to be legitimate protest. I would rather have to tolerate that than live in a world where legitimate protest was being squashed.
There was a former policeman or some type of police individual on 3AW this morning, and they were saying, well, why didn't you just introduce a permit system for protest like they have in the New South Wales? Do you think a permit system can address some of these issues, or do you think a permit system is actually worse?
We've already gone too far with this. The idea that you need the government's permission in order to protest against the government is absurdity. This is a really, really dangerous. That's a slippery slope. Every form of confiscation starts with registration. The minute you have to register something, you are giving them the resources they need to take it off you. If you have to register your protest, you are giving them the opportunity to start to say no. No. We should never be asking for permission for a protest.
Yeah. So, I mean, then perhaps the fact that Jacinta Allen didn't go down this route, because it feels like it would be an easy route for them to go down, saying that New South Wales does it. It might have not been as controversial as this even in terms of the public discourse. But I have the same concern when it comes to permit systems. Like you said, the moment you got to ask permission,
No.
that's just like during COVID, like all the protests that people were doing, they could have just said, well, you don't have a permit. And that would have been the de facto reason to shut it all down.
Correct.
And I saw that during that time, it's the first time for me actually seeing it in a country like Australia. There's a very legitimate reason for people to be out on the streets in complete defiance of everything that the government is saying. It was incumbent upon people, if you do not agree with the government, you should be out on the streets protesting, because there is no other way that you're going to get your message out there, because they are just steamrolling everything through. The media is telling you, the politicians are telling you, all the press conferences they're holding are telling you that you are doing the right thing by staying home, when in fact...
Social media was censored. We couldn't even talk to each other freely online. So where else do we go? We go to the streets.
Exactly. So definitely when I consider what's happening right now with these protests, and I do find a lot of the protests that I'm seeing right now, there is very kind of, shady is not the word, but, there is this kind of anti-Semitic type comments. I see that a lot. And there is this kind of freedom that people are having in terms of how they disparage other communities very openly. And I get it. It's over a foreign ethnic conflict, overseas conflict. And I understand that perhaps the things that people say overseas in those countries, they might not consider it anti-Semitic. It just might be the norm for them to speak about the other country in that way. I think there's a lot of that happening. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the rights and responsibilities of people who have migrated to Australia to integrate within the wider Australian society, and to understand that members of the Jewish community or members of the Muslim community have been here for generations. They are Australian in many different ways, and to hold them accountable and to say things about them in ways which, make it feel unsafe for them to be a part of the Australian community and to engage in Australian society, I think that is problematic. But I think there's a lot of people that are here now in Australia that haven't really understood the kind of social contract you sign when you become a citizen here, to have to deal with all these different types of people from all over the world. It's not just about your ethnic conflict overseas. This is its own country with its own values and laws, and we treat each other in a certain way, and you have to do your very utmost best to put the past behind you, or to put what's happening elsewhere behind you, and not let that become the reason that you do things which are harmful and unlawful in this country.
So you and I actually went together to attend one of the pro-Palestine protests. I would actually say anti-Israel protests. I don't think they were pro-Palestine at all. In London, when we were in London, that was when it all kicked off. This was in, I think, mid to late October. It was only within a few weeks of the atrocities that happened and the war kicking off. And this was a very, very passionate affair. I will give it credit for being absolutely massive. I would believe the estimates of 100,000 plus people being a part of that protest. From the vantage point that I had, I would say that's a very credible number. But there were a couple of things that immediately caught my eye. Number one was the presence of groups who could not possibly live in the country that they were protesting in support of. These are LGBTQ groups. These were transgender groups, and very overtly and very openly so. And I had to reflect on the fact that only in the West could these groups be seen side by side as this sort of melting pot, all gathering around a common cause. The second thing that I noticed very quickly was that the real hardline Islamists were a long way away from the location where the LGBTQI groups had gathered. There was physical separation. They had different mustering points. They didn't all gather in the one spot, and I think that was very much on purpose. The third thing that I noticed was that the Socialist Party over there had jumped on board in a big way, and they had their signage everywhere. They had tents set up every 100 meters or so, handing out placards that had whatever slogan on it, and then Socialist Alliance or whatever the socialist thing was, and then selling merch. I mean, the irony of socialists selling merch on the roadside is not lost on me. And so what we were watching was this insane collision of Marxist progressive politics, fundamental Islam, and the extreme end of the sexual revolution, all coming together in this single spot. And I had to just stand there on the streets of London and go, where else in the world outside of the West is this even possible?
Exactly.
Like, this is a Monty Python sketch
Yeah.
unfolding before my eyes. This is not possible anywhere in the Middle East, ironically, outside of Israel. That's the one
Mm.
place
Mm.
where you could have Muslims and LGBTQI people and Marxists all coming together on the streets and actually
Yeah.
all be safe around each other. That's the only place in the Middle East where that's really, really possible.
Yeah.
So I just found that incredibly eye-opening. And then you and I talked to two lovely old ladies that were there, and they told us all about how they came to every protest. They didn't even really have to know what the protests were about. If there was a protest on, they were going to show up and play their part. And it was just, I really honestly, I felt like I was in some sort of a Monty Python sketch that day.
Yeah.
I do think it's very, very sad that people can't see what they have in their own country because they're so caught up. And yes, the loss of life is horrific. The loss of innocent life of non-aggressors is absolutely awful. And in that, of course, I include the victims on October 7th as part of those people. But also, I mean, if you're a child born in Palestine, you don't know any better. And
Yes.
war has simply taken over your place of abode and you get caught up in that. That is a horrific thing. That is a truly, truly horrific thing. It is possible to have compassion towards the innocent human beings on both sides simultaneously. You don't have to hate one group. There's no requirement to hate one group.
Of course.
So we can recognize the humanitarian tragedy and we can recognize the loss of innocence that's happening here. But for me, the thing that I come back to, and I just can't get past these 2 points in tandem. Number one, in Israel, there are Palestinians and Muslims who live in complete safety. The same thing cannot be true. It cannot be said of any Israelis that might want to move into the West Bank or into Palestine or anything like that. The second thing
even the rest of the Arab world, to be completely honest.
Correct. And then Hamas has in its charter the death of every Jewish person and the destruction of the Jewish state. And I just sit there and go, whatever you may think of what's unfolding on the ground, you cannot have a lasting peace where one side of that negotiation has, as part of its purpose for existing, the death of the other side. I just can't see. I can't see any way to reconcile that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I'm just going to read this comment here because I see this here often, and it says, stop worrying about shit happening overseas and worry about what's happening here. And I think the reason we're talking about this is because of the impacts that it is happening out here in our communities, to the extent of laws around protests being now adjusted in Australia. So you might think it's happening elsewhere, but those carry-on impacts into Australia, and I think a lot of that comes down to the failure of leadership within the Labor government over the last year, not being able to clearly address some of these issues. They've lacked moral clarity when it comes to certain things that align more with the Western way of thinking, which is a part of our success in the West. And I think they've taken the easy road out many times because of the makeup and the dynamic of our more multicultural communities. And sometimes you need to be that strong, bold leadership in countries like Australia. And you're seeing that right now with Donald Trump. He's out there saying, if you don't, by the time that I'm in power on the January 20th inauguration day, if those remaining hostages, which include American citizens, if they're not all free, there's going to be hell to pay. And that is directly aimed towards Hamas and those individuals who are, carrying this on. He really wants to end a resolution to this. And it's a very clear message. And I know there's community members and people that support the Palestinian cause or the Arab world, the Muslims that might not like that type of messaging, but that is the messaging of a leader in the West. You will get the complete opposite messaging of a leader from Turkey, for instance, because he is directly considering the impacts it has on his country. So, and that's what we're lacking in Australia. I think a lot of our leaders are doing things to appease international bodies. We see this all the time. They're doing things to appease, minority groups. And it doesn't really connect with what's best for the country as a whole. And now we're finding oourselves losing our civil liberties in the sense of these protest laws being enacted. And that impacts all of us.
And here's the interesting thing. I'm a libertarian, and libertarians fundamentally believe in the ultimate minority, which is the individual. Right? Libertarianism is actually the ultimate minority political philosophy. You are a minority of one. And yet, even as a single individual, your human rights should be respected. Your priorities and what you want to do with your life you should be allowed to go and make your own mistakes and have your own successes and so forth, and pursue what you would be passionate to pursue. on the proviso that you don't use that freedom to start hurting other people.
Mm.
Right? You cannot use that freedom as an excuse to then tread on other people and deny them their freedom. And that's where, when we get to these minority rights, somehow that gets lost. It's like, we're a minority, therefore we have the right to deny you of your rights. We have the right to force you to change something about yourself. And I'm sorry, that's not how rights work. Rights protect you against the intrusion of others. They don't entitle you to tread on other people. And yet somehow when we get to these minority group rights, we have this mindset that, oh, they're a minority, so they're allowed to tread on others.
Yeah.
Can I touch on Jacinta Allen for a moment and her decision to continue not having an Australia Day parade in Melbourne? So Daniel Andrews canned those during COVID. We've just seen Jacinta Allen is now continuing. COVID's well and truly dead and gone. There's absolutely no medical excuse, not that there ever was, but there is now no medical excuse to not have an Australia Day parade. And so here is the Victorian government that will support every other minority cause, but they will not support an Australia Day parade for a majority of Australians that would actually like to do that. And I think that tells you a lot about the leadership. You were reflecting on leadership a moment ago. I think that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, I mean, as someone that's South Asian heritage, it's nice. Like, there's these kind of Diwali celebrations and like all these kind of New Year's things, and I'm like, okay, cool, it's good. It's it's good for the communities that are here, whatever, they can celebrate, and the governments get involved in it, and they'll have like a dress up thing and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, cool, that's fine. But when you go to those countries, they have their national day. They have their national holidays. They celebrate. They're patriotic.
Correct.
But if you look at India, they are patriotic despite the very conflicted history there as well. There's lots of issues there, but they're still very patriotic about their country. So in Australia, we're losing that kind of identity as Australians, and they're taking it away bit by bit. These things seem like minor things, but I think it goes to the fabric of a nation. And the more kids grow up and go to school and learn to hate this country, and this is hatred of a country, these kind of acts that they do, and the alternative doesn't exist. There's no alternative to this, because much of the population, I think 60-something% of the population, are happy with Australia Day. We had the Voice to Parliament vote, and many Australians voted to be a united nation. So we have this kind of clear path in terms of what the majority of people want. But yet the agenda of the politicians, especially the Labor government and the left, seems to be this divisiveness, this hatred of this country that's been pushed ever so more every single year, as much as they can. So I think, how do we fight against it? How do we change the direction of this? People are saying, well, I'll still celebrate at home. And I get the whole messaging around that. Like, they don't need the government to have these events, whatever. But I think slowly this actually ingrains itself into society, and eventually people will be ashamed to even have the Australian flag, like in this photo, these people wrapped around it. They'll be ashamed of that.
Oh, people are already being shamed for that online. But Rukshan, you're already doing your bit to fight back against this. And I just want to say massive respect to you for having as your first guest a diversity hire, a straight, white, middle-class male Aussie. We're an underrepresented minority, and I just really appreciate you giving me a platform and giving me an opportunity to speak.
Yeah.
But here's the reality, Rukshan. If I actually had my way, the government wouldn't be involved in commemorating any events at all. Taxpayer money shouldn't be spent on that. These are cultural institutions, and the culture doesn't come from the government. The culture comes from the people. So I actually wholeheartedly applaud, in fact, the Allen government saying, "Well, we're not going to do this," just as long as they say the same thing about every other one. Stop spending taxpayers' money on public events. The public can organise their own events. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I would love to actually see Australia Day get bigger and better in Victoria, because the government's not involved. And because people go, right, there's a void here and we're going to fill it. That would be my ultimate outcome here. And to actually set an example, number one, the political class, you're out of touch. You think we don't want Australia Day. You're completely wrong. You don't know the people that you claim to be representing. But number two, we the people actually have the power. Because if we step up a little bit, each person, 4.5, 5, whatever it is, 5 million people in Melbourne now, we can have an absolutely kick-ass Australia Day down in Melbourne, despite the government not wanting to be involved. So I would suggest, for those of you thinking about doing it at home, can I suggest try and turn it into a street party. Try and turn it into a front yard thing with everyone that wants to come by, not a backyard thing with closed doors and only those that were invited. Like, let's just try and bring that Australia Day celebration out into the public within Australia, into the parks, into the streets, and try and have it that way rather than as private backyard events. And I think if enough of us get on board that, then we can send a message.
Yeah, that's a great way to turn the tide a little bit on that. And yeah, like you said, be more community driven and just be more proud and just do it yourself and go out and do it in public with other people around. So yeah. Let's see how that goes. This debate, I think when we come to January towards this time, there'll be more things to talk about Australia Day. Unfortunately, we kind of get into this cycle where everyone that week will be this company will ban this thing, this company will say this, and everyone kind of wants to get their piece of whatever ideology that they want to promote during that time. So I look forward to the discussions at that point as well. Going back to your ex, Topher, I've landed on, and I know like some of these topics, if you've been watching my show over the last couple of days, I've touched on these many times, but I think it's still stuff that's in the news because especially with this thing with John Pizzuto, what's happened with Moira Deeming, there is a vote coming up on, not a vote, sorry, like a party room meeting on Friday about readmitting Moira. So, John Pizzuto, we had Dictator Dan, I think for a decade almost in Victoria, and then he kind of disappeared. Right? He said he would run for a full when he won the election. He said he'd be there for his full term, but of course he doesn't keep his promises, so he just did whatever he wanted to. Yeah. And then we had who some people call Socialist Barbie. I don't know if that's offensive, but just inter Allen. And in some respects, she is a little bit better than Daniel Andrews in the sense that she's not always like, patronizing people. Like she does her own little thing. I'm saying she's still destructive with her decisions, but she's not out there like lecturing people all the time like Daniel Andrews was doing, right? At least that's my reading of it. You hear very little from her in that regard. But there is this kind of vacuum of leadership in Victoria. And even when you look to the Liberal Party, which is the alternative government potentially, same thing. The leaders there, what's happened to the leadership there? Because John Pizzuto, with everything that's happened here with Moira Deeming, he was today bashing the government about some other issue. And again, when he is talking and knowing his history with this Moira Deeming thing and the fact that he can't even bring himself to apologize for what he has said and done in that instance, even after the federal court found against him, that he doesn't have the dignity to even actually apologize to one of his own members in a decent manner, even just as a man. And he's the one that's saying, "Oh, the government's so bad, and they're not good at this thing, and you can't trust them, and they're not good people." Well, this guy himself, how can you trust this guy, Topher? Like,
look, this is the thing. I've renamed him. John Pizzuto is actually John Weak as Pizzuto, because he's weak as piss. And the unfortunate reality is, when you have a weak opposition, you end up with a terrible government. You need, even if your team are in government, you need the opposition to keep them on their toes. You need the opposition to keep them sharp. And when you have a weak opposition, you end up with a really, really terrible government. Victoria, in my opinion, and I've moved out, by the way, I'm no longer in Victoria. Victoria, in my opinion, has become the California of Australia. And don't jump to the conclusion that that's a good thing. It is not a good thing. What I mean by that is that it's become a one-party state. If you've got two parties that are both viable, either one could win an election, then they have to vie and compete for the centrist vote. The swinging voter who could go either way, they have to keep trying to appeal to that center. And that keeps them somewhat sane. The problem is, once they are confident that they're going to win the election no matter what, then it becomes not about attracting that middle voter. It becomes about who can take power within the party. And that's about power brokers. That's about backroom deals. And that's about appealing to the most extreme elements in your party. So moving from a two-party state, Liberal Labor or Democrat Republican in the US, to a single-party state is actually a huge structural change in the incentives that exist within your politics. And Daniel Andrews and Jacinta Allen are the cream rising to the top in the form of the most extreme, the most vicious, the one that is most willing to do the backroom deals and do the backstabbing. And that has been made possible because the Liberals have been absolute wets ever since Jeff Kennett. And We should be just as angry at the Liberal Party in Victoria as we are at Labor for completely screwing that state.
Mm. Well, I mean, you mentioned Jeff Kennett, but he's kind of involved in this as well. He's got his hands on this as one of these kind of backroom power brokers, and I think they just stuffed the whole thing up in terms of when it comes to more redeeming. Like the way that it all went down, they played Daniel Andrews' game. They played, like you said, the game of appeasing, the far left, for instance, along these issues where it was very simple to actually just end it. And have an amicable solution to this without it ever getting to where it's gotten to. And I think, the Liberal Party, if they really truly want to, feel like they represent perhaps, people like myself and other Victorians who are looking at this thinking just what a disaster this state is and we need leadership, I think they need to kind of turn on their leader, stab him in the back, or just very openly get rid of him and have a flush out, have a clean out. Moira Deemings just posted something just now. I just saw this. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I'm just going to quickly read it because I think it's in relation to what's happening on Friday. So let's just have a read of this. To clarify, I have defended myself, my children, and the innocent Let Women Speak organisers and attendees against a defamatory campaign to expel me from the Liberal Parliamentary Party for almost 2 years. Throughout it all, I tried to conduct myself with grace and dignity and continue to defend the Liberal Party, our values, and my place in the party room. I have always believed that our party can and should stand firm together and fight with conviction for our economics and political principles, not to win government, but to serve in government. Nothing has changed. So I think she's putting forward her position that she would like to very much be in the fold of the Liberal Party, but this is the Liberal Party that she wants to see, and this is what she believes in, and this is kind of what we're talking about right now that we need from these leaders.
That's right. The Liberal Party is not what it was when Menzies founded it. If you read the We Believe statement by Robert Menzies, it sounds fantastic. You go, yeah, that's amazing. I'd love, the Liberal Party must be fantastic. Well, they would be if they'd actually held to those values. And here's the psychology that has led to John Pesutto and really a whole string of Liberal Party leaders being as bad as they are. There is a belief that there is no viable party to their right. And I use the term loosely. I'm not a fan of the left-right false sort of binary, but anyway, it's what we use. It's a shorthand. So in the same way that whether we have the Greens to the left of Labor have to be careful not to move too far to the right because otherwise they leave too much room for the Greens to soak up more voters. But there isn't an equivalent to the right of the Liberal Party. This is why they amalgamated with the Nationals. The Nationals were a threat to their right flank. And so they amalgamated with them and brought them inside the fold and neutralized that threat. And so what happens as a result is the Liberal Party can keep on going further and further left. And this is what we've seen. They're not chasing the centre, they're chasing the left-wing votes because they assume that everyone to the right of them has to vote for them because there's no one else out there. And that's true until someone like a Moira Deeming comes along and actually shines a spotlight on them and says, are you living up to your values? Are you living up to the We Believe statement? And suddenly shows just how far to the left people like John Pesutto have gone. And that's why Moira Deeming had to be eliminated. That's why John Pesutto didn't do the smart thing and say, hey, those idiots weren't invited to that protest, so that's a non-issue. Shut up. Yeah. That's what he should have done, right?
Of course.
But he didn't, because it was actually in his interest to take the opportunity to try and destroy Moira Deeming, because the most dangerous thing to a left liberal is someone who actually stands on principles. So Moira Deeming is an existential threat to the current power structures inside the Liberal Party. I hope that the backbenchers of the Liberal Party have the numbers to get Moira reinstated, and I hope that is immediately followed by a leadership spill, and I hope that Moira finds herself in the cabinet. People are saying she should be premier. It's too soon for that. She needs to go through another couple of electoral cycles, really learn the ropes, but I would love to see her in a cabinet position very, very soon. On the inside of the government to learn those skills, because I'd love to see her as a future Premier of Victoria.
Yeah, definitely. I think this whole thing, this kind of trial by fire that she's been put through and kind of been introduced to the public through this as well. And I think it's really, it would, of course, build someone's character. And I think, like you said, Moira Deeming is still very new into the system, but eventually I think she will grow from this, get stronger and stronger, and potentially, yes, be a bit more of a conservative style leadership candidate for the Liberal Party. And, we might definitely need that one day in Victoria with the way everything's going. More people might wake up to the crazy socialist style politics of the Labour Party and the Greens here. So
we can only hope.
Yeah, definitely hope the best for Moira Deeming to be in there and continuing her fight. So, Toph, I'm just going to switch over to X as it is now on my X,
Yep.
and
Yep.
we'll just quickly have a squeeze through and see if anything pops out over the next 10 minutes and just have a chat about that.
Sure.
Then we'll probably just get to some of the comments and see if there's anything we should reply to. And again, guys, thank you for watching and joining in the comments as well. And I know there's a few trolls in here. I don't have moderators. The trolls, eventually they'll get bored, or they'll just, of course, be helping the algorithm in terms of getting it out there. So the more they comment and say nonsense, it actually helps.
I've never understood this idea of don't feed the trolls.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, shove their mouth full of hamburgers, for crying out loud. Keep those people around. They're good. They're good.
Exactly. Now I'll get a comment here from Carl. She's watching, our friend Carl's J Soda.
Hey,
so
Carl.
she's written, the frustration I have is there is such an established group thinking both parties that the outliers like deeming are demonstrably wrong for simply not getting in line. It's a hive mind on both sides of the political aisle. We need to have more debate. And she said a few more things, but it didn't show up. But that's the thing. Like, I think people don't understand that in the major parties, at least, their main focus seems to be winning elections, and they'll say and do things based on winning elections. It's not really about conviction politics. It's not even like what you see in the US with Trump. He's all about conviction and the things he believes in. And even if people don't agree with him on the border, all these kind of things, he will say it as it is. But I think in Australia, at least, you'll see when it comes to election times, even if Dutton is talking the talk now, if the polls look a certain way and they need to get those numbers in a certain direction or certain people to vote for them, they will change their messaging. So they won't always stick to the things that they truly believe in. And it's sad, but it might be a reflection of our political system and the way the votes work.
The tragedy is that you get the government you deserve, and that doesn't say good things about the Australian people. If we're getting the government we deserve, then we need to improve ourselves and then hope that the government improves. But that's it. What you just said there is exactly what Moira Redeeming said. She's not about just winning government. She's about serving in government. And so therefore, the values and the principles and what it is that you stand for remain important, whether you're in government or whether you're not. Whereas people like, Scott Morrison, I think was a classic for this. He was an empty suit who wanted the job, and when he got there, he had no idea what to do with it. He was like a dog that finally caught the postman, caught the back tire of the bike, and he's like, now what do I do with this damn thing? I got the thing I always wanted. Now what do? I don't know what to do. But what we're seeing around the world, for better and for worse, is the return of conviction politics. Trump is a great example. Javier Milei in Argentina is another great example. Conviction politics.
Definitely.
Pierre Poilievre in Canada. I'm loving what I'm seeing up there. There's some fantastic stuff happening.
Yeah.
And I asked the question the other day on all my socials. I said, who is Australia's Donald Trump? Do we have one? Is there such a thing? That bulletproof, just by their own pig-headedness, bulletproof conviction person who can rally a movement and create a movement around themselves. And the truth is, I don't think we have one. And I don't know where that leaves us. And do we not have one because we don't have one? Or do we not have one because we're actually not ready for one? And anytime one starts to emerge, we cut them off at the knees, tall poppy syndrome or whatever it may be. I haven't figured that one out yet. But whatever the cause, we don't have that conviction politician. And I'm not sure that we would reward them if they appeared.
Yeah, and look, I think it's not purely just about conviction politician when it comes to the way the Australian system works. The thing with Trump is he has, to lack of a better way of saying this, FU money. He does not care. He does not care about what they put him through. He can fund himself. He doesn't need the handouts of the Republican Party. And he did that. He did all of this literally by himself this time around because they were not willing to give him any type of support, really. They're all sucking up to him now. You see it. They're all kissing the ring now. They're all turning up at they're all turning up at Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring of Trump.
Lining up.
Because he's completely demolished their entire. He's changed the entire layout of the Republican Party for generations, maybe. It's like a dynasty almost that he's created there, and hopefully it continues on with the MAGA movement growing in Trump's fashion as after he's gone. But you need that kind of person, and I think unfortunately, the system, the political parties, it just doesn't really work out that way. We do have people like, for instance, a Pauline Hanson, who's very opinionated, speaks their mind, and there's a few other people like that in Parliament as well. But they don't have the the power structure or the capacity around them, and even the backing of the Australian people many times, because they don't understand how the system works, and you know this very well, to actually rise to the position of being an instrumental player in changing the direction of this country. So we seem to be going in a direction that is really it's a combination of like it just kind of rolls over into the next government, and there's no real dramatic changes. They're just kind of fixing small problems. And then, you know, some of them might stuff it up even more. And then the next government comes in, and then we hope for the best. It's kind of like that. There's no, you know, there's no kind of MAGA style movement of revitalizing Australia and, you know, bringing back manufacturing and doing these kind of things. They say these statements, but it's not really like in that same manner.
But the wild card now is, what is the knock-on effect going to be of Doge happening in America? Are the Australian people going to say in enough numbers, hey, we want that over here as well? The problem with Australian politics is that it was designed for continuity and stability, which means that if it heads in the wrong direction, it's incredibly hard to then change that direction. It's good, it's stable. If it goes in the right direction, it's good, it's staying in the right direction. But we've got a situation now where, in order to see real reform in Australia, we would need to have reform happening in the federal government and the state government and at the local government level and in the public service and the bureaucracies simultaneously. Because if only one of them is trying to reform, the others will stop it. The others will, you know, if the federal government's trying to reform, but they don't have control of the bureaucracies are going to slow play. We've seen this time and again. They can outweight a politician. 3 years is not that long over in a 40-year bureaucrat's career. They can outweight a new minister. They can outweight. They just slow play everything, and then the politicians change, and they can get back to business as usual. The same thing with state versus federal. If the federal's trying to do reforms that state doesn't like, the state government sues them, ties them up in federal court, keep it in there for 4, 5, 6 years, and by then the government's changed, that minister's gone, and everything can go back to the way it was. So we actually need a mass movement, and the only way we're going to get multiple layers of government on side all at once, willing to tame the bureaucracies, is going to be if that impetus is coming from the people. Yeah, we are the ones that have to change. We have to change the political incentives. And I think the greatest opportunity of my lifetime to do that is about to happen over the next 4 years as we watch Doge unfold in the US. And our job, or my job as I see it for myself, is to create the awareness of and the appetite for a similar thing to happen in Australia.
Well, yeah, let's see. I think we'll see the start of that at least next year during the election time. And I know you've already started a little bit of your own campaign to educate the Australian population. We probably don't have time to go through the whole video, but you did do your famous marbles video. And if anyone hasn't seen it, I'd just jump on YouTube or X, look up Topher Field, and you will find him explaining the Australian
Topher Field marbles. Just add the word marbles after my name, and you'll find.
Yeah, it's a great explainer. It goes for a bit of time. I look, honestly, I would say it's worth playing the whole thing and digesting it and talking about it. So maybe when we get close to the election time, we should do something like that. You know, wherever you can go on Topher, go to every single platform you can, and educate people on how the system works, because it is quite mysterious. Like, for most people, that they don't understand what they're doing when they're voting in Australia because of the way it's set up. But the way you explain it, I think, really opens up some, you know, more eyes around the way that people could be effective when they're voting and help out the minor parties, for instance, that a lot of the freedom community that watches some of our content would be interested in having more positions in government. So definitely the marbles video, check it out on Topher Field. I'm just going to jump on X now, and let's have a look at what's happening. This is interesting. Kamini, let's see. This is the leader of Ayatollah, right? He's been posting on X. He put an interesting one recently, actually. Ayatollah Khamenei. About a century ago in Europe, they said women should have financial independence and freedom. This idea looked good on the surface, but what was the underlying reality? Their factories needed workers. They wanted to hire women to be laborers and pay them less than men. It's a very interesting tweet by one of the leaders of Iran, having a go at the West. What do you make of this type of commentary that he's doing at the moment on X?
Well, obviously, he's doing it for his own self-serving reasons because of his particular cultural and religious views. There is actually a grain of truth in what he said, though, although I would argue it happened a little bit later than what he has said. So, obviously, World War One, a lot of men went off to war. They needed women in the factories. That really was the beginning of women having access to jobs, and through jobs having access to independent income and so forth. But it really took off actually after the Second World War. The same thing happened again in the Second World War. Men went off to war. Women worked in the factories, but it actually continued even when the men came home. And what we now know, actually, due to memoirs from former FBI directors that have written books after they'd retired and various declassified documents, the FBI actively worked to support women's rights movements in the US during the 50s and 60s and the sexual revolution in order to increase the number of women in the workforce, in order to grow the GDP number, because the government wanted the GDP number to look like it was growing and to make the economy look like it was really healthy. And what they did is really interesting to me, because there's a lot of work in family life, looking after kids, cleaning a house, cooking and preparing meals and all these sorts of things. I was raised by a full-time mum. There were 7 siblings. I'm one of 7. Boy, she worked full-time, but she didn't show up in the GDP figures. But if you can get a woman to go out and work and outsource everything, so now she's buying food that's already been made, we're buying pizza instead of her cooking a home cooked meal. We've got a cleaner coming in once a week or once a fortnight. We're now paying money for all the things, all the work that used to be done as a part of the household. Then we've taken the same work is being done, the same children are being fed, the same house is being cleaned, all the same things are being done, but we've taken them from being outside of the GDP figure and put them inside of the GDP figure. And so it didn't actually liberate women much, in my opinion, at all. I don't think we're watching right now this remarkable movement amongst Gen Zs and younger back towards traditional families and traditional life. And it's by no means a majority, but it's a very significant minority that are kind of going, you know what, I don't think we're happier. I don't think we're better off because of this. Now, I support the right for women to decide if they want to go and get a job, run a business, whatever. My wife runs a business. She's very successful. She's made much more money than me over the course of our marriage. I wholeheartedly support her. I've changed more nappies than she has. I've cooked more dinners than she has. I'm a thoroughly modern man, okay? But at the same time, I think this Western idea that women are automatically happier working a career and working a job, I don't think that's been proven to be true. And we've run the experiment, and I don't think that's true.
Yeah. No, interesting take, man. And I think with Kamini, like his commentary, like you said, it might go towards defending some of the criticisms that people would make of Iran and the setup that they have there. Because a lot of the discussions that we have in the West when it comes to Iran is about the oppression of women's rights. And maybe he's making the observation there that the system that they have, potentially in terms of the family and the women, in terms of the labor that they don't have to do in those countries, might be a better thing. But again, this is a bit of a divergence because it's a massive topic to actually cover at length. But I just find it interesting that he's kind of delved into kind of showing up the West at this time period in that manner. So I don't know if it's actually him writing it or some interns or something. But
it's some sort of what a wild time to be alive, that the leader of an Islamist regime can be on the same platform as President-elect Donald Trump and engaging in culture war, tit for tat, war of words. I think what a time to be alive.
Yeah, it is kind of a culture war, tit for tat. Like that's kind of what you'd see some individuals right. It's one of those kind of things. So it's interesting. So we've got some more posts there about some sort of anti-Semitic things. What else? Hunter, of course, is he's really enjoying life these days. I saw some videos of this as well, and he's just seemed very happy. He's probably drugged up, who knows? But it's great for him, isn't it? Like after everything that's happened, just to get that pardon from your dad. And life is great.
Look, people point out that presidents have given pardons to relatives in the past. Trump pardoned the stepfather of one of his. I can't remember how the relationship quite worked, but he's given pardons as well as a president. I find the concept of a presidential pardon odd. I'm not quite sure why that was framed into the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, in the first place.
Do we have anything like that in Australia? Do we have any type of pardoning system?
Not that I'm aware of. Maybe, but not that I'm aware of. But for me, there are two things here. government needs to be actually not corrupt, but it also needs to appear to be not corrupt. And one of the things that I don't think people in power give enough thought to is the appearance of corruption. You could argue and say, well, other people have done the same thing and this and that, and we were worried about him having, suffering politically motivated prosecutions by Trump over and above what he actually did. Like, you could make a case for rationally why he would do that, but you can't change the optics. And the optics are that there is now a two-class world in which people with power get away with things that others, simply never would.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that just continues to erode trust and continues to deepen the divide that we're dealing with at the moment.
That's a good take. This is kind of that kind of typical anti-American behavior. You've probably been following they murdered that healthcare CEO. I forgot his name. Have you been following any of that? Because I don't know if you've seen online, there's a lot of people celebrating this this murder, and it's quite it's quite weird the way that they're celebrating it as well. Like, they're making merchandise, they're making banners with other CEOs that they want to take out as well. It does feel like the US, at least some parts of it, that, the end of the Joker, that scene at the end of the movie where he's kind of standing on top of a burning car or something, and everyone else is kind of coming out as these kind of vigilante style figures. It feels like there's that kind of movement has grown, unchecked over the last couple of years, and they're ready to kind of unleash over the next 4 years, potentially, depending on what happens. Like a George Floyd type situation, these kind of wild protests. We might see a lot of these kind of, left-wing style justice against institutions and people that they don't like, and they celebrate it. How did that come about?
Well, this is a natural extension of the Cultural Revolution, the long march through the institutions, and the transformation of Marxism and Leninism into this sort of American style of progressivism. If you want to know the future of America, there's two old books from the 50s and 60s you need to read. One is the Cloward Piven strategy. To understand the future of America, read about Cloward Piven. They were a couple that both worked on this strategy that was essentially to bring in communism by first collapsing capitalism, by growing the welfare dependent sector to the point that it was no longer financially sustainable, and the US government would collapse under the weight of its own debt. And if you have a look at the US government right now, it's extremely close to collapsing under the weight of its own debt. We are one crisis away from people losing all confidence at the Cloward Piven strategy actually coming to pass. I would say without the election of Trump, it was a given that the Cloward Piven strategy would have come to pass within my lifetime. But the other book to read as well is Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. Now, he was a what do they call themselves? Well, a radical. Sorry, they called themselves the Radicals. And this was at a time when you had Black Panthers running around committing actual murders of people. You had, Martin Luther King got shot, and assassination in the public space in this contest of ideas at the time was quite common. And so there was a real drive amongst the progressives, amongst the radicals, to basically murder their way to a perfect society, which makes sense given that they were born out of Stalinism, born out of Marxism and Leninism. These people were just, we're just one more purge away from having a perfect society. If we just kill another few million people, then we'll be there. We'll have a perfect society. And they really adopted that and brought that to America. And so what we're seeing is not actually anything new. It is a return of this basically blood in the streets idea or method of making the world a better place. If we just kill the bad people, the world will be better. And that they genuinely believe that to be true, and they genuinely believe themselves to be qualified to decide who lives and who dies. That makes them extremely dangerous, because they are, in the words of C.S. Lewis, it is the tyrants who oppress with the approval of their own conscience that are the worst. And that's what these people are. They have the approval of their own conscience while they celebrate murder. Just like Rukshan, people had the approval of their own conscience while they called for you and I to get shot with rubber bullets or to get locked up during the COVID years. Those are the most dangerous people.
I mean, that was kind of my first taste of that living in Australia. Like, I believe we do actually live a very privileged life in Australia. And we know how to deal with those kind of issues that many people around other parts of the world deal with, because in those countries, when there is issues around, different ethnic types of violence, religious violence, they will turn on their neighbors. They will actually be the ones that pick up the pitchforks and go and, burn and destroy homes and kick people out. And we kind of had a taste of that during COVID, how easily that people living next to you, how easily they would turn on you and dob you in, like, your neighbors. And it's like, hey, they call the police, hey, this person's not wearing a mask in their front yard. You should go and kick their door in. We are always at the edge, right, of kind of that tipping point, like you said, of going towards a society where people are celebrating murder because it's a CEO of a healthcare company. And yes, there's issues within the American healthcare system, and this is not the forum to discuss that. But does that mean murder is okay? And it seems like, at least in the US, some political persuasions completely believe that. And I think you gave a great summary of why that's happened over time. So I'll continue on with one more story. Probably end on a happy note, and it's not a happy note, but this story continues on Raygun. I don't know if you've seen the breakdancer.
Can we not talk about Raygun, for crying out loud?
Well,
how is this news? How
does she become a? She's like, of course, her mediocrity as a so-called breakdancer, and and then she's kind of got this larrikin status from our media and or whoever's bestowed this upon her. But I think she's like just kind of lost the plot a little bit, is my personal take. And this is with this comedy club, this comedy person that wanted to have a show with about her and her dancing. And now I think they're going after them for 100K or is it 10K?
10K.
10K is okay. Why is it we kind of continue to elevate, in this country at least, people who are like, I'm not trying to be offensive towards her or anything, but mediocre, at least as a breakdancer. She's a crappy breakdancer. She might be a good person, and she might be great at other things, at a job or whatever. But in terms of breakdancing, she's not great. So why do we keep elevating these type of people here?
So what she did brilliantly was play into the I don't even have a word for this. There is an intellectual elite craving for sophistication. And one of the metrics that this intellectual elite, the intelligentsia of Australia, use as proof that they're better is that you don't understand. Now, we see this, for example, with art. All right, we have these, what we call art now can just be a blank canvas or a jolly banana sticky tape to the wall with a little plaque that tells you all about it. And actually, the art is how to write the wank on that plaque. That's actually the art form. The modern day art form is not what you put on the canvas. It's the wank that you put on the plaque. Now, what she did brilliantly was she had the wank ready to go, all about how she was studying intersectionality and breakdancing and da. She had the plaque. The artwork, the breakdance, was gobshite. But she had the plaque ready to go, and she played into this intellectual elite. And so she immediately finds herself with the support of a whole bunch of journalists out there and a whole bunch of artsy, arty-farty kind of elitist people, because they resonate with that. They're like, oh, I have another opportunity to show how superior I am, because all the masses, the ignorant people, they're all outraged, but I know better. I can see the sophistication of this wonderful demonstration of whatever, wank.
Yeah.
That's what she did beautifully. And you have to respect that. The grift is absolutely phenomenal.
And on that note, Topher, I think we'll check on some of the comments. I like this one. Raygun has tried to copyright her kangaroo dance, and I believe she has actually trademarked that move and that picture, because they were saying, the lawyers were saying, or she was saying that the lawyers were doing that because other people might try to use that image of her in that particular stance. And of course, this all goes back to the fact that this is some form of weird cultural appropriation of kangaroos first, and perhaps even the Aboriginal population in Australia that mimics some of those in their traditional dances. So yeah, that's I always find this pretty funny when I hear Raygun and the kangaroo.
It's astonishing that she's gotten so much airtime. I mean, I can understand the mainstream media talking about it. They've got nothing better to do. But Rukshan, for her to be given airtime on your show, I mean, this is prestigious. This is $1 million a minute airtime you're giving away for free.
I'm doing it for fun, to be completely honest, just to kind of, because we've been talking about so many serious things. So a few episodes now, I've talked about Raygun at the end, because there is a bit of entertainment value in terms of discussing how this all came about. There's so many comments coming through, guys. Look, we're going to be on for maybe another 10 minutes. So if there's any questions that you have that for Topher or myself, please chuck it in the comments. We're actually watching and reading the comments now, so I'll bring it up. But otherwise, Topher, how did you like the X show format. It's interesting, isn't it? It's a bit of fun, spontaneous.
Look, it's a bit of fun. It actually makes me a little bit mindful of Brett Cooper on the Daily Wire, where she's got her show, The Comments Section. Now, she's specifically literally looking at comments and what people are saying. But in a sense, you're doing the same thing. I mean, X is a public crowdsourced news platform, and you can choose who you follow, etc. But the algorithm ultimately will promote the stuff that the people are resonating with and interacting with and connecting with. So, look, I think X is one of the most fascinating platforms we have in the world, not only because of the free speech angle that they've taken, where they actually allow you to say things, but the instantaneousness of it. If you think you've felt an earthquake and you want to know if other people are thinking the same thing, you don't go to the ABC website to see if someone's written an article about an earthquake yet. You go to X to see who else is jumping on X going, did anyone else feel that? Am I losing my mind? Right? It is so fast and completely democratized that I think it is genuinely the most exciting piece of real estate in the world right now is X.
Yeah, and it's actually only getting better. So there's a lot of technical improvements that are happening on X in a manner where you can
Did you not get the memo that Elon Musk has ruined it by firing 75% of the staff? You haven't heard? No, Twitter, I mean X, sorry, it's dead. They're all going to Blue Streak or Blue Hair or whatever that other one is.
The one where the pedophiles hang out.
Yes, exactly. That's where that's where everyone's going.
Blue Sky.
Get the memo. Yeah.
And no, I'm not going anywhere near Blue Sky because that whatever I see posted from Blue Sky on X is a very shady, and they're all against censorship. But on that, you reminded me of the staff thing at X, and this is a post I saw the other day. So on the left, you have Twitter, the Twitter staff, and on the right, you have the X staff now. So the main team that's running Twitter. So there is a bit of some obvious things there that we can perhaps comment on that we won't comment on, but there's a bit more diversity, I think, at X now, whereas perhaps at Twitter, there wasn't diversity. There seems to be a lot more people that fit the mold of our, what's her name? The E-Karen.
Yes, exactly.
Former Twitter looks like a bit more of E-Karen's genealogy. And the new X looks like they've just got the best person for the job. And look, it's a lot of these kind of young kids as well who are doing this. It's pretty amazing to see. Very smart people.
Rukshan, I hope you're not assuming anyone's gender as you talk about that picture on the left. You're, there's. I'm trying to be very careful. A lot of they thems. I'm sure there's a lot of they thems in there. That's
true.
So stop jumping to conclusions, Rukshan.
That's true. Well, I got a question here for you, Topher. Are you going to be running in 2025? Some people want to know your political aspirations.
Definitely not. So when the Libertarian Party asked me to run for them, Liberal Democratic Party. Last election, I said no. They asked me again. I said no. They asked me a third time. I said no. And then they came back to me a fourth time and I finally said yes. And I should have stuck with my first answer because I can do more good as a commentator than I can as a candidate. And I don't aspire to be a politician. I don't. I commentate on this stuff because these assholes won't leave me alone. I just want to be left alone. And if they're not going to leave me alone, then I'm going to talk about the stupid stuff that they're doing. That's literally why I do it. I want nothing more than to have nothing to do with politics for the rest of my life. Yeah. But unfortunately, they won't leave me alone. So I'm going to talk about them.
One more question from the audience. So, Topher, what's your prediction for the climate wars? And I think this is going to be a bit of a debate when it comes to election time, especially around nuclear.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing stuff like, Indonesia is investing in building up their nuclear plants and kind of, going in that direction. But we seem to be so lost and, arguing about this and decades go on and we're still kind of at the same point. Do you think this is going to be a major point, this election?
My prediction is that the debate will be over by the 2028 election.
Okay.
Right. Whatever happens now is actually kind of irrelevant. This debate will be over in 3.5 years' time. And it will be over because Donald Trump will have we've just spent 4 years absolutely eviscerating anyone and anything to do with net zero targets and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
He's absolutely going to drill, baby, drill. Our petrol prices are going up because of the Christmas rort. They always put the prices up during Christmas. But come the inauguration on January 20, mark my words, come February, March, April, you are going to see new historic lows of petrol prices, even in Australia, because America is almost immediately going to go back to being energy independent.
Yeah.
And that's going to put pressure on downward pressure on global prices. And the oil producing economic cartel, which normally restricts supply in order to elevate prices, won't be able to do that because all they'll be doing in the process is making more opportunity for American oil. So they will keep pumping. So we're going to see a dramatic drop in petrol prices. We're going to see an increase in overall CO2 emissions because as energy prices drop, manufacturing is going to come back into America. And when I say manufacturing, I mean energy intensive industry. That includes AI, that includes server farms and tech industry as well. They're going to start using more energy in America because it's going to get cheaper in America, and therefore there's going to be an increase in CO2 emissions there. When America's CO2 emissions are climbing, India's are going through the roof. China's are increasing by an entire Australia every year.
Yeah.
The argument over whether we should cut emissions in Australia is a completely moot point. I had an argument with someone on X about this today, where they were like, oh, but Australia should still cut emissions because we have the highest per capita emissions. And I said, last time I checked, a molecule of CO2 is not aware of whether it came from a high per capita country or a low per capita country. It has the same effect on the atmosphere. And so when China is growing by the size of Australia every year, the fact that they're still relatively low per capita isn't relevant. What's relevant is that Australia disappearing off the map would have a barely measurable difference, even assuming that the IPCC is correct and the whole anthropogenic global warming thing is correct.
Yeah.
So my prediction, I have no idea what's going to happen in between now and 2028 with with the climate debate and with the energy debate. But my prediction is by 2028, it will be over and sanity and common sense will have won.
Yeah. On a common sense, this comment here that EV vehicles, Elon is not our friend. I think there's a bit of criticism about Elon from some people on the right saying that he's someone that's, for climate, all this kind of climate change stuff. And, he's an electric car maker and so on. But I think Elon has been quite balanced in the way that he's approached all of this. And he's not someone that's, at least from what I know, has said that, there has to be you snap your fingers and everyone's going to be driving an electric car. He doesn't think that way. He thinks very long term.
So I've been cynical of Elon for a range of reasons over the years. And the funny thing is, as I've then actually started to pay more attention to him, he's actually directly, not to me personally, obviously I don't have that kind of pull, but he has in public directly addressed my criticism. So one of my criticisms of him is that a lot of the money that he's made has been through government subsidies and incentives and programs to try and get people to buy electric cars. And I'm opposed to any of those sorts of incentives, not just on electric cars, just across the board, get the government out of it. And so I was cynical of Musk, like, oh, he's a billionaire, but he's made his money off grift, off incentives. And I've seen him now in interviews turn around and passionately argue that those incentives shouldn't exist, and passionately and to say, this is crazy that we're doing this, guys. We shouldn't be doing this. But if it exists, of course I'm going to say yes, because I've got to compete against other companies that are receiving that money. And that's happened on a range of different areas. So Elon, the better I get to understand the way that he thinks, honestly, the more I genuinely like the way that he thinks. I do still think he's afraid of CO2 much more than what he should be. I do still think that electric vehicles are an absolute disaster from an environmental perspective, and that someone as smart as him should know that he's actually doing terrible harm to the environment and to the future, not helping. So there are some things that I still take issue with, but honestly, the world is a better place for having Elon Musk in it, and I'm loving the show. I'm just sitting back and watching.
Yeah, and we're kind of seeing Elon becoming this individual like in front of us. Yeah, of course, because he's so intimate on X in terms of sharing his opinions. Sometimes he shares maybe too much information about certain things. He's very I don't know where he has the time to do some of the posts and stuff that he does. So we're all kind of, and like this Daniel says here, the problem is people have a savior syndrome. Elon, like everyone, is flawed human, and we shouldn't worship pop culture identities. He has become like this pop cultural kind of person that might change the trajectory of a country type individual, and he does have some of that characteristics. Of course, he's trying to build spaceships that'll take us to Mars. So he is someone who is, when you look back in 100 years, Elon Musk will have his name up there. I would suppose like someone like Albert Einstein, almost, these famous people that we talk about. He is
more as an industrialist. His name will be alongside the likes of Henry Ford and the
as an industrialist,
and these sort of people. Yeah,
exactly. But the difference, I think, is today, even those like Henry Ford, all these people were intimately involved in certain political policies and changed the direction of the country during that time. But I think what people are seeing is in the social media sphere, because Elon is so involved in it, you're getting like this kind of behind the scenes look at how this happens, how these people kind of influence the trajectory of a country. So there will be a lot more of this. I think the media will really try to focus on Elon and Trump's relationship, and they'll try to build some dramas there and create chaos. But I think they'll be able to move beyond that and actually look forward to the future that's important for America. And of course, Elon is thinking worldwide and Mars as well. But on that note, I think we've been chatting for long enough. Topher, is there anything you want to tell or share with us? Do you have any books? Do you have any websites? What's happening?
Okay. Well, look, I mean, if you're giving me a free kick to go and grift and sell my merch, then I will, of course.
You are a libertarian. You would not say no.
Goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. You can get my t-shirts, my hoodies. You can get my book, Good People Break Bad Laws, my second book, Good Christians Break Bad Laws, which unfortunately the printers have stuffed up. So it will be out in February now, which is really frustrating because I met my deadline and they didn't meet theirs. However, it's coming. You can order it. It will come to you in February. And if you haven't seen Battleground Melbourne, so Battleground Melbourne is the reason why Rukshan and I know who each other are, is because we were two of the people alongside Avi, alongside Anthony Burge, alongside Michael Gray Griffith, alongside a bunch of others that hit the streets and actually started to for most of us, break the law for the first time in our lives, or break the law, sorry, for the first time in our lives, as part of the Battleground Melbourne era. Now, you can watch my multi-award-winning documentary, by the way, 14 awards around the world, titled Battleground Melbourne. If you just go to battlegroundmelbourne.com, that's it, just starting there. That's Craig Backman, amazing police officer who resigned. There's lots of footage from people's phones, lots of footage from the news. Plus, I interviewed 20 different people, including Rukshan and 19 others, and told this story. Protest organisers who couldn't be identified. Monica Smith. There's Rukshan. There you go. There he is, the man himself. It's a good project, if I do say so myself. It came up really well. I'm really proud of it. It's won 14 awards around the world and tells the story of what I believe to be the darkest chapter in Melbourne's history. So if you've never seen it, can I just really encourage you to go to battlegroundmelbourne.com and watch it for free.
Amazing. And Topher, where can people follow you? So at X is the best place?
Yeah, look, I'm active on X, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And it's just at Topher Field at all of them. Same handle on them all.
Amazing. Well, Topher, thanks for joining me tonight on this episode of Rukshan On X and spending your time going through X with me and sharing your views about what's happening in Australia and around the world. I really appreciate your time, and thank you everyone at home for checking in today as well and joining us on this show, and your comments and being involved in the discussion. I really appreciate it. You can find me at The Real Rukshan on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and my website, www.realrukshan.com. But I do prefer, my preferred pronoun is finding me at X. If I put it that way, find me at X, at The Real Rukshan on X, just because it's just so easy just to say whatever I want there. Anyway, guys, have a good night. Topher, have a good night. Hope to have you on the show again. You are much more diverse than Avi Yemeni in your thinking, at least.
That's a really low bar. That's a really, you're just insulting me with faint praise here.
Intellectually. And the guys, actually, tomorrow night, you can catch me and Avi Yemeni at 7 p.m. on the Opposition podcast on these streams. So 7 p.m. tomorrow night, I'll have a show with Avi Yemeni, the Opposition podcast. See you guys. Take care. Thanks, Topher. Enjoy your night, everyone.